Previously on the Beam Chronicles.
I quit, and then he fucking shut me off. And I was a brain in a jar.
A minimum of 3 was a shorthand we used. Visiting an Anomaly required a beam department head, a dungeoneer, and one of the busting equalizers.
Hazel's brother was the guy who built Fisher's mech. Howie was probably having Peter draft up a story implicating the poor bastard in Clifton Hodges' assassination.
Why are we talking about this?
Because I'm worried about you. I don't think you care anymore. You think Howie noticed on his own a little moral victory here and there?
Little moral victories, if that isn't the stupidest, most nonsensical. But it's not exactly my fault that somebody blindsidedly eclipsed my entire list of priorities.
Wait, fuck, holy shit, in love with Jackson, fuck, did I really just think that? What's your brother's name? The one we busted.
Trevor Long.
These are the Beam Chronicles, with your host, MJ Dooney. Book 2, Compromise, Chapter 8, Charlie Shayde.
As far as, history was concerned, this fight between JT and I didn't even count. Hell, I was already intending to apologize, both for dumping the commercial on him without asking, and for accusing him of being less passionate as soon as I finished fighting Sydney. But when I grouped into his apartment, he wasn't there. I sixed him outside floating by my window, apparently waiting to say sorry himself. We talked, made up quickly, got over everything like it never happened, even though it did only 4 hours ago. And that was sort of how it worked now. We still bickered like children, but it didn't last because we liked each other so much, or apparently loved, but black compartmentalizing that. My intentions were never to tell Jackson he was a worse person than he used to be, to point out the way that Beam had distorted and jaded him. I didn't want to twist that knife. I just wanted to tell him that we could try for some wins maybe, and the stuff about him not caring just kinda came out. If I got all analytical and introspective about it, the way Jackson always did, I probably would have realized I had a problem with myself, not him. See, I wasn't a good person. I like to think that I used to be before all of this, when I was a regular teenager and not the anomalistic shadow executioner of my own people. Yeah, I pirated a DVD now and then. I drove a little over the speed limit when I was late, but it wasn't until I met Howie that I got really lost. Spending a brief eternity trapped inside your own head, empty and meaningless and alone in the dark, you tend to bring some of that darkness out with you. But as I got older, I realized there was only so much soul rot I could blame on my shitty circumstances. Somewhere inside of me, the wicked was lying in wait. All the devil did was draw it out. Whatever, it didn't matter. I knew who I was, what I was. At this point, I just tried not to think about where I came from. Partly because I didn't see the point dwelling on it, partly because I just accepted it. What I couldn't accept was that my vial was contagious. Jackson was a good person when I met him, and Howie could have rattled his bones and liquefied his gizzards were he so inclined, but that wasn't how he broke him. There wasn't much torture, no desperate pit of nothing that Jackson traded his eternal salvation to get out of the way I had. Instead, Howie just waited until I drug him down with me. A drowning girl latching onto the first solid thing to touch me in the dark. I infected him with my evil. I blew out his light. We were entwined now, all 3 of us, really, tangled and matted in the filth, like the old myths about rat kings, where a big group of rats would get their tails all tied together and then their brains would connect and they'd develop this hive mind about how and where to move as one disgusting entity. But it'd be one thing if I was all rat-kinged up with a bunch of other rats, as unsound and damaged and cold as I was. What if I made them rats? What if I broke my favorite person? So I impromptu constructed this idea of little moral victories. I mean, what else could I do? The faintest sliver of light, a candle in a cavern 10 miles underground. Hell, it wasn't anything. But I had to rekindle his embers. I had to fix what I'd done, especially now that I apparently loved him. And if he was too far gone, too scared of losing me to try getting it back, I guess I had no choice but to lead by example. We were a rat king after all. If I ran back into the sun, he had to follow. The first thing I could think of was Trevor Long. He was easy enough to find with a little bit of help from my old buddy Dale, the head dungeoneer. Ava could get just about anything out of Dale because he generally liked and respected Jackson. He was afraid of me and poop his pants terrified of Sydney. So all we had to do was implement a little good cop, bad cop, horrifying statuesque nightmare cop, and the cowardly little bitch would be snugly in the palm of our hands, almost regardless of the circumstances. Since Dale played a role in managing all of the dungeons and all of the branches of Beam, he could obviously help me find my boy. Typically, Anomaly would go into the dungeon of the branch which busted him, so Trevor, under normal circumstances, should have been in California. But like most Beam things, there were exceptions when it was convenient. For example, our dungeon in the capital was way larger and more formidable than any of the auxiliary ones, so any Anomaly busted elsewhere with significant firepower would get shipped to us. As luck would have it, for me, not for him, Trevor was high profile, what with his alleged attachment to the Hodge assassination, and sufficiently so to get moved into our dungeon from the West Branch. The claim was that it was for his own protection, but more likely Cranston wanted to stay close to a guy he was going to dump all over the way he intended to on Trevor Long. The first thing I did after talking to Dale was send word to Hazel that her brother was alive in our dungeon and safe for the time being. After that, shit, I didn't really know. This was all blazing a new trail for me. I figured maybe I should at least try to talk to him a little bit, maybe volunteer to deliver a message to his wife and daughters. Sure, why not? I decided I'd just go visit him, see where it took me. And the nice part about him living in my basement was I didn't have to jump to California to see him, but the much crappier part was that somebody else had to come from California because of minimum of 3. The speaker box on his cell wouldn't even operate without a busting equalizer from his case, and since his case was on the West Coast, all of the people involved were 3 time zones away from me. They'd get to me a lot slower than I could get to them, but whatever, at least this way I could watch him. I checked out the list of busting equalizers and was relieved to see Lane Rector's name, since she was the only person at West I knew. Most of the equalizers on the branches were unfamiliar rookies, but each branch also had at least one grizzled old veteran from the glory days of Squad 2, like Lane, to head up the branch. It was Murphy's least favorite part of the expansion, losing all his kids, but their leadership and experience was probably why the whole thing worked out so seamlessly. I always chuckled when I remembered that Lane was head of West, because Squad 2 basically put us on the map, so the redistribution of manpower was typically carried out as close to their personal preferences as Beam could muster. Cal Sparks got the Lone Star branch back with his wife. Mike, Madman Mathis, the artist formerly known as El Lobo, was reinstated to head of the Bayou branch, which is so appropriate if you'd ever met Madman. Caraway got a little shafted with the Mountain branch, no good reason for that match, but Caraway should have been amicable enough to get along anywhere and probably needed the change of scenery. And all things considered, I couldn't be too upset about that particular transfer. Hollywood got Lane Rector, and if Caraway in Colorado were vinegar and baking soda, Rector in California were a goat and an antimatter goat. Lane was a large, burly, hard sort of woman, the type that exuded enough toughness that she didn't need to talk shit to back it up, and when she did talk, it was gruff and curt, straight to the point. She didn't shake hands, she always reached a little further and grasped you by the forearm, firm and strong, feeling your arm wrestling potential or something. So hardly your prototypical California girl, but I guess low maintenance enough not to bitch when she got placed there too. But back when I started at Beam, Lane was nicer to me than basically all the other equalizers right off the bat. Phil used to tease me that the only reason she treated me so well was because she had a crush on me, which totally meant a lot coming from the 14-year-old boy who only gave my tits a break from his ogling when I turned around so he could get a good look at my ass. But being 17, thus essentially a child myself at the time, it was always a little weirded out by the potential of Phil's suggestion. Now that I was so mature and worldly and shit, I realized that Rector's kindness was just stemming from her being the first person, save possibly Murphy, who really got it. Probably before even I knew it, Lane Rector figured out that she should feel sorry for me. I guess I respected her just for that. Anyway, Lane was a relic from a forgotten age in which I was valued for my skill and potency as a fighter, and not only for how attractive I apparently was, but for that nostalgia alone. I was glad to see her familiar name on Trevor's report, even if we weren't exactly friends. Thanks for coming in for this, Rector, I said to her in our elevator ride into the dungeons with Dale.
Yeah, no sweat, Shayde.
She nonchalantly waved me off.
I've been looking for a good excuse to make the pilgrimage back to the capital anyway. Don't mind helping out an old buddy. I'm a little surprised, though, that you're taking such an interest in this guy. He's kind of small time for you.
Yeah, well, kinda small time for you too. I was a little surprised as well that you were in on the bust. She rolled her eyes.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't. My name goes on all the West Branches bust by default. I rake at income bonus time. That was part of the deal I made with Prophet to get me to take this post.
You know, I knew there had to be something more to this story. You don't seem like the California type.
It gets annoying,
She admitted with light exasperation.
but you can't deny the money's good.
I nodded. Sure. I met his sister, by the way. That's why I'm taking such an interest in this case. She was my makeup artist for a commercial that I was shooting. I made her a few promises about following up on it.
You in commercials?
Apparently people like me now. I grumbled and she smiled. But no, actually, I'm not in commercials. I had to bow out because I shot Cranston in the foot on set.
That was you?
She excitedly asked me, and I sheepishly nodded.
Fucking A, Shayde.
I couldn't help but snicker as we high-fived.
I knew it had to be you. About time somebody shot that little asswipe. Missed that crazy shit out west. And yeah, I get it, the sister thing. I know how sometimes cases can get up in those nasty crevices of our humanity. Even somebody as steely and pugnacious as you. I've been there myself. Glad to assist in the prying it out.
That wasn't quite the reason. It wasn't so much for me, more for Jackson, but I didn't think it mattered enough to correct her on it. I tried my best to play nicer with Lane than I did most. She never judged, never abused or made fun, was always happy to help. Part of that probably came from growing up in public schools with a last name like Rector and knowing firsthand how I felt to be mistreated. I didn't want to nitpick and make her feel shitty. We rode silently for the rest of the way down. I reflected privately how stupid minimum of 3 was for commandeering 3 important department heads for my stupid purposes, just in case one of us got a funny idea about breaking out the totally harmless Trevor Long. The combined salary of me, Dale, and Lane Rector was well into 7 figures, yet 2 of the 3 of us had no interest in fulfilling this mission beyond just being helpful. I guess I could have gotten a different dungeoneer than Dale, alleviated some of that economic waste, but I trusted him the most of the lot. This was more a testament to the sketchy sort of weirdo that filled out the department's roster than a testament to the reliability of Dale himself. He said when we finally got to the dungeons.
This guy's row 1, actually.
He extended his finger down the first hallway, all the way to the left when exiting the elevator.
Seriously?
Rector scoffed. She and I walked side by side behind Dale down the row of lockups reserved for the most dangerous anomalies.
Back when I was here, row 1 was pretty much empty, except Big Purple and Typhoon. You running out of room, Polizzi, or is there something about this Trevor Long fellow nobody's telling me?
The second one, Trevor Long was in row 1 as a statement to further distance Beam from Hodge's death, but I was more profoundly struck by something else. Huh! Hey, Dale, I totally just learned your last name today.
Yeah, whatever.
Dale Polizzi, the dungeoneer, grumbled.
I didn't really get any say where to put this guy.
Lane was right about row 1. It was busier now than it had ever been before. Historically, it was barren, essentially because most of the anomalies who were strong enough to warrant a row 1 cell were also strong enough to warrant a quick equalization. But today there was an anomaly in the very first lockup of row 1. The disgusting skull head dude that Sydney busted maybe 3 weeks ago, doing crunches on the floor with a nasty scowl on his face. Several cells down was Sydney's old lockup, still set with the Kavorsky pod we'd found him in, but otherwise empty. Adjacent to that was Foon. And as we went by him, I could have sworn he threw me an uneasy, subtle smile, maybe even a brief wave, like he accidentally forgot that I hated him. I retaliated without looking at him by pressing my middle finger against the glass, dragging it all the way down his block.
Still got a few of those in here myself.
The second to last cell held Rick Fisher, asleep on his cot, and finally, all the way at the end was Trevor Long. Save Dr. Kavorsky and Howie himself, Enzo Skelton was the most dangerous mine I'd ever encountered, and he only made it to row 4, so Trevor was ostensibly worse than the Fly, and you'd never suspect it or even believe it, watching him sit all rigidly against the wall in his orange jumpsuit, chewing his fingernails while his eyes were spinning in a daze.
He seems completely out of place here, Dale.
Already told you I didn't get a say. Besides, he's getting moved again. You know, there was a time where being in any dungeon was good enough so long as they could hold you. There were no deeper meanings to your real estate, no politics. I miss those days. It made my job hella
Dale,
easier.
shut up. He's moving again? If I hadn't cut off his incessant bitching, it would have gone on for the rest of the day, but I honestly was a bit shocked that Cranston and Prophet were considering retracting their big row 1 statement.
Yeah. Peter put in the order yesterday, pushing him to, 18, I think.
That's still too intense, but a much more appropriate place for him.
Lane nodded in approval.
Poor little dude. You know, he didn't even apply to join Ava. He wanted to be an RT, but they figured his tech was too incriminating to ignore.
Rector explained, arms crossed as she watched Trevor realize the celebrity standing in front of his lockup and freak out soundlessly.
He gave himself up in seconds, though. He submitted entirely to Beam's mercy. Why the hell they ever put a guy like this in row 1 is beyond me.
I knew why Trevor Long was in row 1, and so did Dale. What I didn't know was what gave Peter such a sudden change of heart about keeping him there. Had he decided against implicating him in Hodge's murder? I wanted to ask, but I could tell by the way he was glowering at me and slowly shaking his head that Dale was not keen on any discussion of this topic happening in front of Rector, who was still in the dark about Long being the scapegoat of the year. Whatever, I had more conversations on my to-do list than I wanted. I'd get to Dale later, once I was done talking to Trevor. I reached out and pressed the speaker, and he excitedly jabbed his back. Trevor Long, I take it from the way you're dancing that you know who I am.
Hell yes, you're Charlie Shayde. Oh my God, Charlie Shayde knows my name.
He squealed, and Rector pretended to cough, covering her snickering. Right. Trevor, listen, I met your sister, Hazel.
Oh man, Hazel met you. You realize you're like her god, right? Does she have a brain aneurysm?
I smiled. Not quite. She handles herself pretty professionally, but listen, Trevor, I promised her I'd take care of you, figure out what happened, and send the message back to your wife and girls. You're all right, I assume?
Sure, I'm fine. A little confused, I guess. They keep moving me and asking me about the mech that got stolen a few days before I got busted, but I honestly don't know what happened to it, Agent Shayde. You gotta believe me.
I knew what happened to it. Beam took it, beefed it up with weaponry, and handed it over to Rick Fisher so they'd have an excuse for holding on to him after Prophet told him to kill Hodge, but I couldn't say any of that, not in front of Dale or Lane, much less Trevor Long. I don't really care about that, Trevor. Like I said, I'm just glad you're in good shape, so I have happy news to send back home. Give us a second, all right? I sighed, lifting my finger off the comm to ask Dale. What's his sentence in here? How long?
2 years.
Dale said, intently staring me down.
They just reduced that as well, with the order to move him.
Seriously, so he was getting off the Hodge hook. How the hell did Trevor Long get so lucky?
Jesus, this guy was gonna get more than 2 years?
Rector was understandably disturbed.
You know, his bugs didn't even have guns on them, right? Was this just one big shit show of clerical errors?
Something like that.
Dale heaved a heavy sigh and rested his hands on his hips. I felt bad for him, a little. He looked like a totally incompetent putz to Lane right now. And true, Dale used to be a totally incompetent putz, but he'd come a long way since then. This wasn't a sequence of dungeoneering mistakes. This was Cranston, possibly even Prophet, deliberating on Trevor Long's fate and what role they wanted to paint him as playing in Clifton Hodge's murder. Honestly, it was foolish of me not to make the connection before, not to realize how serendipitous it was to land in Hazel's makeup chair, to encounter the sister of the guy getting shafted for Fisher's incompetence. Coincidences were never coincidences at Beam, and the fact that Howie specifically requested my presence on that set probably meant that it was forecasted that I met Hazel, learned about Trevor, took up the cause of helping him. This whole scenario reaped a profit. It just took me until now to figure that out. There was no denying Howie got me to Hazel, and Hazel got me to Trevor, but that still didn't explain the sudden change of heart. Was it an olive branch? Possibly. Howie might have seen the tension between me and Cranston coming to a head and constructed this as a compromise, a peace offering for Peter to hand me after it finally did. That sounded a lot like Howie, behind the scenes orchestrating the whole scenario, Hazel, the dress, just to get our spat done with, our true feelings toward each other out in the open, force us to start mending fences, manipulating people who fundamentally couldn't coincide so that they meshed well enough to make a stable, if uninspiring, peace. None of that was outside of his realm of abilities or even his tendencies. The question was, why did he care? Peter had been here for almost 2 years. Never before did Prophet seem to mind if I was getting along with our publicist. And pinning this on Trevor would have divorced Beam from Hodge almost entirely. He'd give up that luxury just to have me treat Peter a little better. That part didn't sound like Prophet in the least, but maybe he was still bound by forecasts. Blah, too much to think about. I decided to wrap up this long mess before I did anything else. I pressed the speaker again. He instantly blasted me with words.
I can help you find it, Charlie. You and me and Jackson and Sid, all of us. We can go find that missing mech. I know how to track it. I can help you
Listen,
guys.
Trevor. I interrupted him. He shut up instantly. Stop doing that, all right? It's that sort of swashbuckling romanticizing of us that got you into this mess in the first place. We're just people. Jackson and Sid and I were just regular people, and it's cool if you're a fan or whatever, but if you idolize us so much that you start building machines that can hurt someone, that's when we run into problems, all right? He nodded solemnly, almost grimly. You got 2 years in there, and I know that seems like a lot, but trust me, you made out like a fucking bandit in this mess, so do me a favor, take your 2 years, serve your time, don't cause trouble or stir up shit, then when you're done, get out, find your wife and kids, live your normal, happy life, alright? No more robots, no more any of that, just the second you get out, run away from this place. Find your family, never look back, trust me. Promise me that I won't see you in here again after 2 years.
Yeah.
He sighed, nodding his head.
Yeah, I've been thinking along those same lines, Agent Shayde. You're right. It's not worth the lost time. I should have been a better father than this. Committed half the effort I did to my machines to my girls, and then I never have to worry about any of it. When I get out, I am done with it. I promise, Charlie.
2 years, okay? That's all you gotta do, and then you're free of Beam. With your family, rededicated to them, nobody can touch you. 2 years. It's a sweet deal, dude. I wish I could have it. He smirked, and so did Lane Rector, but in his eyes was a hopeful if slightly downtrodden renewed outlook and hope, and hers was a deeply sympathetic and sad compassion. I tried my best to ignore it. It made me a little uncomfortable. I guess that's all I really wanted, I said, letting go of the button and turning my back on Trevor Long. Kinda dumb, but whatever. Thanks again, Lane.
It's nothing, Charlie, really.
And she rested her hands on my shoulders, not unlike a mother would for her daughter.
Hey, I told Murphy I was gonna cash in on one of the 10,000 lunches he owes me. Tag along if you'd like.
Nah, thanks anyway. I'm a little swamped today. I kinda need to think about some stuff. Besides, you and Murphy need your catch-up time.
All right, well, if you change your mind, offer stands.
And she nodded at me sincerely before walking back down toward the elevator, leaving me in row 1 with Dale the Dungeoneer.
Sure, I don't have to tell you this, Shayde.
Dale mumbled to me once he thought Rector was out of earshot.
But this guy was dead man walking like 24 hours ago. Peter was gonna pin Hodge on him and then equalize him. He literally gave me the change of plans last night.
Any idea what caused that change?
Not a clue. Typically when a sentence switches, it's the other way around. It gets worse. I mean, this asshole must have money or a powerful cousin or something.
I ignored him. Obviously, he wasn't any more enlightened on this mystery than I was. I still didn't know what to make of it, and I wanted to bring it up with my boys before I talked any more to anyone else, especially Dale. Well, thanks again for indulging me on this. You're a lot of kinds of shit, but at least I know I can trust you. A little. He snorted, offended.
Thanks, I think. Hey, by the way, Shayde, any chance you could, poof me around with you?
I don't know what that means, so I'm gonna go with hell fucking no.
No, wait, I'm just... the Dungeoneer bunker is a few yards away. You could get there in less than a second, but it's not actually connected to the dungeon for security. Entrance is outside. I'd have to walk to the elevator, ride it up, walk outside to the bunker elevator, ride it back down. Kind of a process. Could you shortcut me?
I can't group other people, lazy ass. Take a walk, it's good for you.
You group teak all the time.
The list of things I did to Jackson that under no circumstances would I ever do to Dale the Dungeoneer was longer than the dreaded marathon back to the desk he was trying to get out of, but for a moment, I considered trying it. Grouping things I hadn't sixed much usually resulted in them being reassembled very incorrectly, but I was getting better at it. And how would I ever accomplish it if I didn't keep practicing? Granted, Dale would almost certainly die from the effort, but that wasn't a completely unacceptable loss. I elevated my six scanning mostly just to indulge my curiosity on how possible it was without much intention of following through. That's when it hit me. It was sort of like seeing a picture 1,000 times or staring at it for hours, then suddenly you discover all these intricacies you've been missing all along. My intention was to six Dale, but in my conscious effort to six more intensely, I also was subconsciously sixing my surroundings more intensely as well, and something struck me from behind, through the wall. An annex of some kind, a stairway downward, deeper into the ground than the dungeon itself, some secret passageway into the earth that I'd stood next to 1,000 times without noticing, and suddenly it popped onto my radar unmistakably. Yet even still, even after I noticed it, something was preventing me from sixing it clean. Something was trying to block my sixth sense. Dale, I muttered, striding around him to the door at the end of row 1. A door I'd seen 1,000,000 times, but I'd always just assumed what was written on that door was exactly what was behind it. A single lockup containing a single anomaly we caught years ago. Dr. Kavorsky.
What's going on, Shayde? You gonna group me back, or should I start?
Shh, quiet, ass! I growled at him, pressing my face against the door and closing my eyes. Sensory deprivation improved sixing. I followed that passageway, that shaft downward behind this door, Kavorsky's door. I sixed down it deeper, almost as far from the dungeon as the dungeon was from the surface. It was always hard sixing over that great of a distance, not physically being in the proximity of the things I was sensing, but it wasn't nearly the farthest I'd ever sixed something before, not close, yet significantly more difficult than it should have been. That weird additional factor, the block, was more and more in play the farther down I went, a cloaking or obstruction of some kind that distorted my sixth sense, shook up the picture, blurred it, in some spots even blanked it. I'd take 2 steps deeper, then 1 step up to reorient, slowly pressing through the fuzzy tunnel. I diligently maintained focus once I finally reached the massive space beneath my feet. The image was incredibly imprecise by then, disjointed even, surreal, absurd, but there were certain architectural features of the area that stood out. Most notably, there were cells down there, like the ones up here, only sturdier and thicker. Row 0, a potential contingency plan for Ava. I wanted to look for Dr. K, but it was all too messy to find a person, so I sixed for his pulse. Maybe he was somewhere else, and this was just a distracting decoy trap Prophet put in place for Sydney or Phil, in case their loyalties reverted back to their father. I had to cut the conspiracy theories if I was gonna six out a heartbeat a mile below me in a room I'd never seen or realized existed with some bizarre additional factor I didn't understand, explicitly trying to shut me out. I needed a clear head. Perfectly clear. There was a heartbeat. A fast one, with a slight murmur. It reminded me of Kavorsky's from the day we busted him, even though I wasn't perfect at distinguishing people by their pulses yet. I thought I'd come back to myself, interrogate Dale about this particular sector of his dungeons, when suddenly I found another one. A second heartbeat. It was slow, very slow, slower than a human's heart should be, at least a fully conscious one. There were 2 monsters down there. 2 monsters the caliber of Kavorsky that Prophet thought too dangerous for all the gusto and impenetrability of row 1. I found myself getting angry that I didn't have any prior awareness of this second monster, that Prophet was hiding someone with Kavorsky's danger potential from all of us at Beam. Maybe Murphy knew. If I asked him, would he tell me? Would he tell me about the second Kavorsky? Or... oh, fuck. Would he tell me about the third?
Charlie, what are you?
Idiot. Dale's voice rattled into my skull and the whole thing was dashed. It snapped me back from my out-of-body sensory experience just as I detected a third heart. For all I knew, there were more, but I didn't want to reestablish my trance and have Dale cock it up all over again. What the hell is behind this door? I asked angrily.
What are you, illiterate? Kavorsky's in there. Now about that ride.
Ignored. You've been in this room? You've seen what's inside.
Of course not. Only Prophet has access to that room, but I'm pretty damn sure it's Kavorsky.
Why? I asked hopefully. Was it possible Dale could actually be useful for once? Could he help me uncover the latest Beam mystery?
Because the door says Kavorsky, duh.
I scowled at the ignorant, feudal dumbass. But when I turned back to the door and tried to plunge in and sift through it again to gather more information, I realized I couldn't. The block was suddenly perfect, eclipsing and full. It was just a door all over again. I couldn't help wondering if the entire experience was a weird fabrication in my head, a sixth sense misfire, like a mirage. But it seems so real not 15 seconds ago. Why could I get through before, but not now? I can't group you, I finally said to Dale once I gave up on penetrating the 6 block again. Walk back to your office, you lazy idiot. I grouped to my apartment before I could hear him whine.
Thank you for listening to The Beam Chronicles, a fiction podcast written and produced by me, MJ Dooney. I hope you've enjoyed Book 2 so far. Email me for any reason, beamchronicles@gmail.com. I have money for art, if you want to make me some art. Social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. No idea what I'm doing, but that's okay. If you have not done so already, a 5-star rating on whatever platform you are using to listen to this would be downright swell. If you already did, thank you. All music and sound effects were sourced from the Epidemic Sound Library. Special thanks to Sergio Duarte for creating the cover art for this podcast, and thank you once again for listening.